Hey everyone, welcome back to the Ceres Podcast. Today I'm joined by Kate Nicholls and Allen Simpson from UKHospitality, and we get straight into what the latest budget and policy direction means for pubs, restaurants, hotels, and takeaways. We talk business rates, why it's being framed as reform, yet plenty of operators are staring at bigger bills. We get into wages too, wage compression, recruitment pressure, and what that does to teams and morale. And we look at the government's route to work and apprenticeships. Useful, yes, but not a huge fix for fundamentals. I also get put in my place a little bit, which I quite like. It is actually brilliant to have these two on together because it's never really happened before. We also, which we're going to have to talk about it. We also talk about VAT, more practical messages, and also what you guys can do if you want your MPs to act. Bring the numbers, not just the noise that you see on social media. This episode is sponsored by Ceres Heavy Duty Degreaser. If you need a degreaser that actually performs, this is it. It cuts through heavy grease, grime, you name it. All sorts of crap across fryers, floors, walls, equipment, worktops. It's powder based, so you can mix what you need when you need it, from a strong soak to an everyday wash. I know many customers that just put a little bit in with their washing, and it strips them back, all the aprons, crap, you name it, it takes it all off. And the thing is, it's made for food environments. No bleach, no solvents, no harsh odours, and it's non-caustic and biodegradable. It's tough on grease, safer on surfaces, and even better for your staff. Ceres Heavy Duty Degreaser, serious cleaning power without the drama. And as always, follow us on the Ceres blog. We've got fresh content all the time, practical insights every week to help you run a better business. Right, let's get into this with Kate and Allen from UKHospitality. Kate and Allen, welcome to the Ceres Podcast.
Thank you for having us
Hello.
back again.
How are you?
It's great to have you both on together, actually. I think there's a lot to add to the conversation. I'm well, given what's going on. But yeah, how are you two? That's the question.
Fighting fit. I just said to somebody that we're polishing our studs again to go studs up and continue pressing the case for hospitality when MPs come back from Christmas.
It almost feels like a lot has happened since we last spoke, but at the same time, like nothing's happened. Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, yes. I think to us, it feels like a continuation of the same. It's the second half of the same horror film to a degree. We've talked a lot about the fact that this year's budget feels a bit like the other half of last year's budget. The last Harry Potter, Deathly Hallows 1 and 2. This is the second of two films I'd rather not have had to watch.
Yeah, and also normally when you have a budget, you run a campaign or you've got a moment in time, and usually you have a sort of pause, draw breath, and there's a line in the sand. For the second year in a row, Alan's right. You haven't been able to draw a line in the sand because 2 years in a row, they think they've done one thing and the consequence is entirely different. Last year, I don't think they'd worked through necessarily that the consequence for Nix would be so devastating on our sector. This year, they thought they were helping. They thought they were doing quite a lot. They've knowingly done it. And so you're having to go back and point out to them that even though you think you've helped, it isn't enough. And, you can't get away from the fact that you knew the rateable values were going up. You knew what was happening. You ran the models and you've still made what is a nonsensical decision. And that's the sort of frustrating thing. So normally you sort of at least have a day or two or a couple of weeks where you're not dealing with budget stuff. But for the second year in a row, you're sort of straight into next year's budget campaign.
There's a feeling out there. And I think they're starting to sort of, we would discuss this to the nth degree, that they might be front loading loads of crap but it almost feels like at this point that they're maybe just anti-business. And I know people in hospitality feel like they're anti-hospitality. I don't think that's true. I think they're just probably not very pro-business, or at least in small business anyway.
Well,
Well,
so look, I do think there's. I was asked a similar question on a select committee in just before the budget, and you've had this question a lot as well. And it is important to make a distinction, which is that the government have identified 8 industrial sectors who they are betting on, in effect. 8 sectors: fintech, banking, some sorts of manufacturing, that sort of thing. And also, they have decided that they need to invest in the NHS and in other things. And therefore, what we've seen, and I agree, some of this is an unintended consequences from decisions not properly thought through. But one of the things that we have seen is that we as a sector have had to fight very hard for the government to understand the value of what we do. So a lot of what we've been doing for the last year with the social productivity index and all of Kate's TV and meetings work has been to drive home why our sector should matter. Because from our perspective, the 3.5 million people who work in hospitality across the UK, they are doing something meaningful and important. And we need to be in a position, don't we, where the government understand that, yes, you get one form of value from an insurance company in Canary Wharf, but you get an equally important form of value from a hotel in the West Country who's employing 40 people and providing routes into work and leadership for people who otherwise wouldn't have that opportunity. So, yeah.
Yeah. In some respects, I think, yes, we do think of ourselves as, is it disproportionately on hospitality? I don't think there's an anti-hospitality message coming from government. I think there's not a full understanding of the consequences because our businesses are very different and the ways that people work are very different. We're not the same as other small businesses. So they can look at it from a small business lens and still get it wrong for hospitality. They can look at it from a big business lens and still get it wrong for hospitality. And in the case of business rates, we are the only sector that is has our rateable value set according to turnover. So the regulatory system treats us differently. I'm not sure it's equally fair to say that this is an anti-business government. It's an anti-government business, I think, at the moment. But I'm not sure it's an anti-business government. I think there is a lack of care and attention in carrying out regulatory impact assessments and working it through. And some of that is the civil service. A large part of that is the civil service not doing the job well enough for ministers so that they can understand the devastating human consequences of their decisions. It's very easy in the Treasury to sit and manipulate numbers on a spreadsheet and say it's only 1% or it's only 4% without putting the reality behind it. And that's what's so devastating for our sector, and that's what I think we need to be better at doing ourselves. And that's everybody who listens to this. I think when we're talking about business rates and the budget, we need everybody who listens to this not to necessarily tell all of us on Twitter or X or social media or share within their own business groups. We need to be making it real for the MPs. Here is my rateable value. This is my business rates bill. This is what it means. I am going to have to close, can't employ somebody else, can't afford to do X, Y, and Z. Please take that to the Chancellor and ask her why she thinks I can afford to pay that.
I think this is something I've mentioned before in the past on multiple podcasts, is that saying something on social media is just like standing in the road and shouting something. It means nothing to an MP unless you turn up and try make it their problem. And I think,
yes,
and you see a lot, they just think, well, I've dumped it on Twitter. I've even tagged UK Hospitality. I've even tagged my MP, but it means nothing until you actually make a letter, write it, send it, lodge it officially.
Yes, yeah. And actually, there's this idea that the MPs and Rachel Reeves, when you tag her, or GB News, or any of the other things when you tag them, are actually individually seeing it. I do because I run my own Twitter account or I run my own social media, but most people don't.
Yeah.
So the idea that Rachel Reeves will have heard and understood the howl of anguish from the industry because 20 people have told her on X, it just doesn't cut through. But people should go to their local MP's surgery and people should be very specific. You can ask for a meeting in a constituency office. You can go and meet them in person if it's easier, or you send an email saying, here's my bill last year, this year, how do I afford it?
Really compare it with real facts. Why do you think, why do you know even, that business rate reform is spin? The lower prices that they're now telling everyone that they've got is spin. Tell us why that is true.
Well, look, the Chancellor stood up and said that she's going to support our sector by a 5p in the pound cut in your business rates multiplier. Many businesses heard that as their tax bills going down 5p. I was talking to a business just north of London, runs a lovely cafe, fantastic baker, really nice place. And she went on TV immediately after the budget and said, I'm so grateful after such a tough time. It may not be everything, but it's something amazing. Now, we know, don't we, that the problem with the way that the business rates work is that there are two fundamental inputs, and three now with the transition relief. But one is your rateable value and the other one is your multiplier. And of course, what we saw was the multiplier come down. Good, sounds great. At the same time as rateable values went up significantly. Now, the government knew the rateable values were going to go up, and that's why we campaigned so hard for the full discount, which was available by the law that they passed within the last 12 months, by the way, which allowed them to do a 20p in the pound discount. So, yes, of course, the multiplier came down, but the rateable values went up. And I would argue something more profound as well, which is if you go back to the government's manifesto for the last for the last election, they were very clear that they were going to replace the broken business rate system to rebalance from the high streets onto the online giants. I don't think in good faith you can argue that that's what's happened, because we have still seen people's tax changes driven by their property values, which are themselves driven by where they are fundamentally. Yeah. And Kate's point about the different way of calculating before a pub and a hotel compared to the rest of the economy is profoundly important as well. But the underlying point is we are taxing relatively small businesses often in quite large premises in city centres because of the nature of hospitality and the sorts of properties it needs. And in effect, we have retained business rates as a sin tax on running a community business.
And on investing.
Yeah.
We're penalised. If you take an empty shop and open it up as a shop, it doesn't change. If you take an empty hospitality premises, you have to make a big investment. Yeah. You have to make a big change as to what you're doing for the business model. You invest in it and you get penalised for investing. It's a tax on success and it's a tax on investment. And I think it is just that sense. So to go back to your question about the spin is clearly just failing to understand what is a fiendishly complicated tax system and a fiendishly complicated property system. And that to me says you need simplification. But Alan's right, the fundamental breach of promise and breach of trust is you were doing something that was supposed to help our sector specifically, and you have protected other sectors, and you've made a conscious decision that business rates, you need to do more to invest. Even when they talk about transitional relief, you'll hear the Chancellor and the ministers say, we are putting aside £4.3 billion to support people whose bills are going up. That's not for hospitality. That's for the economy as a whole. Probably a quarter of that will come to hospitality. And that still means that bills are going up by between 15 and 30%.
Yeah.
And you can't get away from it. And that's what everybody needs to put to their MPs and ask them to put to the ministers. You've made these changes. It's very complicated. Is it true that my bill is still going up? Yes or no?
Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit, Kate, about the sort of the sectoral differences? I mean, you talked about this a lot, but
in different.
Yeah, just those. So to your point about that breach of trust in effect.
Yeah, it is. Most people in the sector rightly or wrongly, however a politician will try and manage it, small businesses across hospitality feel quite betrayed by this and let down, because they felt that somebody had heard and understood and was changing, and they haven't got fundamental reform.
Yeah.
And so when you look at it, the government has to look at business rates in the round, and there's lots of properties that have every property has a business rate. You have to do things like, how do you do a business rates for the Channel Tunnel? How do you do it for Wembley Stadium? And they've got big increases that are going through there when they've looked at values that are going through for all sorts of businesses, or Tata Steelworks, or car manufacturers. They were lobbied by all of those businesses, and once again, they took the decision that they needed to support them in their bills going up. And if that meant that hospitality didn't get as big a support as it should have done, that was the price they were paying for balancing the economy. The fact is that they promised to deliver something for hospitality and retail in the high street, and they've made political decisions.
Yeah.
You can argue against it, but they need to own those decisions. They need to come out and explain that they did do that. It's not that they didn't understand. It's not that they didn't listen. They made tough decisions, and stand by them. Which I suspect they will do. We will try and work as hard as we can to make sure that they understand the consequences and bring that home and try and get some changes. But in reality, I think that they will stand by their first decisions.
I still think one of the biggest issues with business rates is, I agree, massively complicated. People just don't get it. And I think that's on purpose. I think, why would government make it simpler? Because then people will understand it, I think. And maybe that's the cynic in me. Like, if it was easy to understand, because even when they spoke about business rates the day after the budget, there was people that genuinely didn't know that it was going to affect them, because they're so difficult to understand. You need to calculate it and so on. Yeah. And I think the promise was, with their mandate, this new government's mandate, I think everyone thought, yeah, they're going to make some real chunky decisions. And they really haven't. Like, I'm sure there's some chunky decisions in the background to other sectors, but for some things that have been annoying the industry for a really long time, the promises have been there that we're going to deal with this.
I think that was the hope, the talk, and even just in the small business strategy and the high street strategy that was published in July, they were referencing fundamental reform of business rates.
Yeah.
At the general election, they said scrap business rates and replace it with, for hospitality, retail and leisure, replace it with a permanent lower multiplier. They can technically say they've delivered that, but in reality, they haven't. It's the same. And also, it's so many complicated bits and pieces of transitional relief and compensation for different things going. So that, again, I think it's smoke and mirrors that on the day, people couldn't understand what was going on with their bills. And these are small businesses making decisions about their livelihood. And even a week and 10 days on, some of the larger companies still can't get their head around what is being proposed. And the government hasn't got anything that they can point to that is a ready reckoner. And I think if you're dealing with a sector that's 90% SME, it's unforgivable that you've got 2 days before a fact sheet comes out and you still don't have a calculator that allows those people to calculate their business rates bills.
And yeah, absolutely. And I think, as citizens, let's say, we all looked at, and this isn't about the left or right or Conservative versus Labour. I think if we just look at the government, we looked at the last government, and I think most people were ready for change, and we thought, yeah, they're not doing their job right. They told us we're going to get on top of this. The grown-ups are back, and they're not really any. In some respects, they're not no better. I don't want to get into whether they're worse or not. I just think they just don't seem to be any better without making it political.
Yeah, I think so. So look, I will elegantly sidestep your question as to which wrestler is the better wrestler.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there is a point about the long-standing failure to understand the value of hospitality socially and economically. And we talk a lot about the fact that this is the largest employer of young people, largest employer of people who left school, second largest route into leadership for people who left school without going to university. It's the largest employer of people working part-time around the caring responsibilities. And I always use the example of my mum, who, as a single mum in Kent, looked after us while working behind the bar of the local pub. But equally, it's not all a soft story. There's a very hard story here as well. This is one of our most successful and resilient exports through tourism. it underpins so much of our success in other sectors as well. Early part of my career, I ran an inward investment agency, and we used to go around the world and try and get, I don't know, a fintech or whatever to come to the UK. And the story was, look, come to the UK, your business will grow and the coffee's good. You cannot convince those businesses to come to somewhere unless they believe that the leisure, hospitality, culture offer is strong, because they're not going to be able to attract stuff. So we talk a lot about the sector in two ways. One is its fundamental scale and importance across society, because lots of those shiny sectors, they are really only in London, Oxford, Cambridge. They're not providing opportunities in Bootle and in Truro and in Northumberland and in Aberdeen. Equally, this is a fundamentally important part of our overall economic ecosystem. And I think, historically, the UK hasn't understood that. It's more true, if you look at the number of people employed in the sector, to say that London is a hospitality city than it is to say it's a financial city. More people work in our sector, in this city in which we are currently sat, than work in the glass and steel buildings in Canary Wharf.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I guess that moves us on to essentially the next big issue that I've seen span across all business industry, which is wage policy. And it isn't going to just affect hospitality, although I think it will affect young people in hospitality. Wages have gone up. The rate, I think one of the best ways to explain what someone said to me yesterday was, there's a hotel owner that was on the podcast yesterday, Giles Fuchs, and he's the owner of Burr Island Hotel in Devon. And he mentioned that a big concern is that as national living wage keeps going up, it creates wage compression between the lowest earner, or the people that are coming into the business, the people that are experienced in the business. And I sort of said, again, cynically, maybe that could be dealt with from the government's point of view, is if you give the national living wage to the people coming in that's higher, and then the people that are more experienced, more wages from the government's point of view. And he just goes, it's just going to get harder and harder and harder. And I sort of get his point. And where do you guys lean on this? Because I think you're right. If we've got young people coming into this industry, everyone, like the soft story that everyone sells when they're trying to do something important, like if they're in politics, I started working at McDonald's, I worked at McDonald's. Well, everyone wants that soft story, but I think that's going to get harder and harder.
I think you are seeing that. And when the national minimum wage was first introduced, it was a floor below which wages must not fall or should not fall. And it had broad support from all three parts of the industry. You had industry, government and academics and the unions making the recommendations on rates. It's got distorted in recent years because we've had such a high inflation environment, and it's now getting to be the average wage for a lot of sectors, and it's starting to bite not just at the low paid sectors, entry level jobs, but actually the salaried workforce that's coming through, particularly at a graduate level. So do you think government needs to sit down and rethink this? And it's not just government, it's all political parties need to rethink this. There was a driver, there was a metric. Have we got to a tipping point where it's now impacting on the ability to employ people, and it's impacting on jobs? Because, you can see it in the junior doctors strike and the resident doctors strike. They're talking about if somebody in Pret earns X, why are they only earning £2 an hour more? And you're going to get that across the whole of the public sector. So government needs to get a grip of this, because they are now effectively setting the wages for 70 to 80% of the population. And the differentials are starting to creep up and up and up. The minimum wage and the living wage, certainly when the living wage was introduced, was always, again, sold as putting more money in people's pockets so they can go out and spend in retail and hospitality. So therefore, it's a virtuous circle. But if you've got to the stage where it is at such a level that you can't afford to employ people, then that virtuous circle is broken. Equally, when you are trying to get people to move off welfare into work, if they are impacting on the earning levels for universal credit, etc., and you need to think about how that is interacting. So I do think it's time for a pause. The Low Pay Commission needs to understand the impact of everything that is feeding through in terms of inflation, wages. The Bank of England is warning about it. Even the Resolution Foundation, which is the left-wing grouping that talks about how do you tackle low pay, if even they are telling the Chancellor, that the policies on national minimum wage and national living wage are impacting on jobs, stopping recruitment of young people, and should be rethought, then they need to pause and take listen. And part of the problem is every year we have the Low Pay Commission looking at next year's rates. They never have time to look and take stock at what has happened over a previous period of time. Now is the time to do that.
And no government has ever not taken the advice of the Low Pay Commission. I know they haven't been existed for a long time, but
it is a get out of jail free card. You know,
basic.
it's like buying IBM. You're never going to get into trouble. You can always say it's not my fault.
Yeah.
The Low Pay Commission recommend it. The Bank of England recommend it. The Valuation Office recommend it. It's not us. We're just doing what the independent body says. But they set the remit. They tell the Low Pay Commission what to look at. So it's a cop out. They told the Low Pay Commission that they wanted to maintain the living wage at 66% of median earnings. That doesn't take account of what's been happening in the inflation environment and pay catch up in certain public sectors. And they told the Low Pay Commission to make recommendations on the minimum wage that would get them to parity, 18 to 20 coming to the same rate as 21 plus by the end of the Parliament. That's what they did. That came out at 8%. So the Low Pay Commission is doing the maths based on what the government is telling them. So if ministers tell you to do one thing, you do it, and then ministers just blindly accept it, then to me, that is ministers making a decision to impact on jobs.
That's such a your broader point there, I think, is so powerful. That one of the things which gets our sector to where we are right now, but also is affecting the broader economy and society is the set of non-governmental or quasi-governmental organisations to whom very important policy judgments have been in essence exported. And it means that, you know, we are in danger of treating what are philosophical questions and quite important technical questions, entirely outsourcing them out of the democratic principle.
Yeah, they are supposed to be advisory bodies.
Yeah.
And a minister is there to step in and go, hang on a minute, that's given us an answer that can't work in the economy. They're abdicating responsibility.
Because we as ministers have to trade off.
Oh, we ministers now.
We
as ministers.
We're one.
Can I just say, for all your listeners, if Alan and I were ministers, we would have a totally different set of policies.
Absolutely, they would, yeah.
We would. I mean, that's a whole other podcast.
Yeah, absolutely.
What if we were? Yeah,
that.
Fantasy government.
Yeah, but a minister's job is to make trade-off judgments. So so take this pay question. As you rightly say, the Resolution Foundation have said we are now at a point where we are trading off wage growth for those employed with the ability to employ people. My view is that there is a moral question about the extent to which we are willing to grow unemployment. That should really concern us, right? Now, it's a minister's job to trade off they're given two technical inputs. It's their job to say, well, okay, I understand this lever does this, but if I pull it too hard, it has this effect over here.
Yeah.
And we you know.
And you've got total disconnect between government departments. You know, you've got the Department of Work and Pensions who are trying to get people off welfare into work, now, bizarrely, subsidising jobs because people can't afford to employ them. Yeah. It's not that they're subsidising jobs to get people off welfare, but the fact that you can't employ. There's also, you know, back to Alan's moral imperative, if you have 2 years unemployed between 18 and 24, it impacts your life chances, your opportunities and everything up until the age of 55, 60. And there's a high chance that you will never get work if you get into that situation. We really need to be intervening here. And we urgently need government to join the dots.
Yeah. And the cynic in me, again, I'm quite positive, but I'm trying to be like devil's advocate and trying to represent everybody's views. But like the cynic in me tells me that one lever they haven't ever pulled, and the last government didn't either. Well, they've left the threshold, the income tax threshold, the same. So they've lifted the wages, which businesses have to increase. So they're essentially sneaking more younger people into paying tax. And you think, well, if you wanted to help younger people and you wanted to help businesses, this is where the NIC move was a bit crazy. But on the flip side, the threshold hurts employees, because you're telling young people, come and work here, do your 38 hours a week, you're earning low wage, or a lower wage than it could be, but that's offset by the fact that you pay less tax. Well, that isn't the case now, because it's offset by the fact that you pay more tax,
Yes. I mean, that whole shift, and a very social democratic principle that the coalition put in, that we would lift people so that they didn't have to pay tax, NIC or PAYE, we would increase that threshold. That seems to have just been abandoned and reversed. And it's a political move. It's deliberate because it's stealth. People don't notice it. So you can avoid having the controversy of a 2p. You're not having to be open and own your decisions. It's exactly the same as living wage. It's exactly the same as business rates. If you had to go out there and say you were putting a penny on income tax, people notice it, even if you do all sorts of funny things. If you just do it as a stealth tax, people don't. It's the same as the business rates bit. It's fiscal drag. It's a stealth tax. People are paying more tax because they've gone into higher bands. It's difficult, but they are a little bit, it's a sort of Macbeth element here. They are so far steeped in blood that to go back would be more difficult than to go forward. I'm paraphrasing Shakespeare, but
Kate has a degree in English.
No,
I will paraphrase Shakespeare for as long as you'd like.
I don't think we have enough time.
Sometimes when you'd rather.
But I think also, a few of my listeners and people that I follow on social media and such, one of their biggest concern, but it's happening. The ball is rolling. The snowball is going down the hill. And I think it's the gap between 18 to 21 pluses. It's going to get closed. By the end of this term, it's going to be closed. I think they wanted to do it from the beginning. They couldn't. The Conservatives, when they were in the general election campaigning, they said it would be by the end of the term. So I think that it's fair to say that by the end of this term, if it goes Labour's way, or the government's way...
No, this is deliberate, though. This is not accidental.
No, of course,
This is their policy.
It is, and I think...
That's where people need to be looking as to, that's where the projection will go forward.
They can't stop seeing as it's a maybe. What I think I was trying to frame clumsily there is that it is deliberate. It's coming, so be ready for it.
Yes, and actually that's where trade associations and business groups like ours can help small businesses. If they're in membership, we sit and give evidence to the Low Pay Commission. The Low Pay Commission comes back and says, based on what the government's projections are, here is the band that these rates are going to go up. We can advise businesses. They should have a clearer line of sight. Not necessarily that it's the right way it should be going. It's not the best answer. We will work to try and minimise it. But here's the line of sight of a reasonable worst case scenario. So, they should be plugging those numbers in. They should be looking at it. 8.5% on the minimum wage is exactly on the trajectory of getting to 21 plus by 2028.
Yeah. Again, being cynical, I'm seeing a lot of articles coming out from the media saying that 17-year-olds are not very happy about the situation. So I'm convinced that what we're probably going to see is a bit more lifting there. And I think...
I disagree.
You do? Okay.
I disagree, partly because the government's intention is to have people in education.
Okay.
And therefore, when they're in education, there is a restriction on what they can do in the hours that they can work, and it is very different.
Yeah.
I think it's harder when it's 18 and you've come out of mainstream education and the government is stepping off, pushing people to university.
That's a good point. I think one complaint a lot of people in hospitality sort of say, and I think it probably still borders at the 18, 19 mark, is that when it's how you treat that person, but where parents say, oh, we're going away on holiday, and Johnny, who still thinks he's 17, is actually 18, 19, and just says, well, I've got to go, and leaves them in the crap. And I think that's probably where the business needs to start treating them like an adult, not a child. And I think
we need a bit of a reset. And there's a long way to go before the Employment Rights Bill is enforced. But that does give us as employers an ability to reset the relationship, rights and expectations on both sides. If you are going to fundamentally shift and give workers more rights from day one or however, the employer has or you're going to change 0 hours contracts, guaranteed hours, whatever it is, the employer should be setting out very clearly what their expectation is of that worker.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whether that's number of sick days before we sit down and have a conversation about your commitment to work and things we might need to do if there's a health problem we need to be aware of.
I guess if someone...
But that rights and responsibilities and what's in the contract, we need to be professional. We need to formalise it. We need to help small business owners navigate through it. But we need to be very clear that that kind of behaviour isn't acceptable.
Yeah. And
there's consequences. We need to have consequences. We're so scared about consequences. So if we can reinforce and give reassurance to small businesses around how to defend if somebody makes a complaint, how to manage that process, what contractual arrangements to have in place so that somebody can't do that and knows what the consequences are, we can help them avoid that fear of an employment tribunal.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's talk about forcing people that are on benefits into hospitality and the building trade and free training and apprenticeships. But is that lipstick on a pig if nobody wants...
Okay.
Well, no, it's not lipstick on a pig. It is serious and important, and there is money out there. The issue is it's in such limited areas and such limited numbers. But this is about expanding the work that UK Hospitality has done with the Department of Work and Pensions to get people from welfare into work. My concern is you need a pull-through mechanism. If somebody's on welfare, they need a lot of work to get them to be job ready and work ready. Then they need training to get them into hospitality and get them ready for the work in hospitality. And then there's common induction training. And if the government is funding that, that's great. But the point at the end of that, they need a real job to go to. So many other industries, banking, accountancy, they have apprenticeships and there's no real work. Our sector, it's real work. My problem is, unless you make it affordable to take that person on, wages, NICs, business rates, all of that is to allow us to be able to afford that person at the end of a 6-month project. Otherwise, you are just taking people off welfare, filling holes, digging holes again in order to recruit them. But there is real money there, and there's real opportunities for small businesses to get that support that might help them employ somebody. Yeah. And if we can then get them into an apprenticeship, which again for small businesses, difficult to navigate, but it's free, you don't pay NICs on somebody who's on a short-term apprenticeship. So those are two sound like stupid government announcements. Let's subsidise jobs in hospitality because we've made it so difficult that you can't afford to employ people. I have made that point to ministers, but while it's there, while there is money being given by government, let's make sure it gets to the small businesses to help them in this situation where they can't afford to employ people.
I agree with that. I think we have to treat them as two separate issues. Has the government made it very difficult to employ people in the sector and to employ people, as you've just been rightly saying, at the start of their careers? Yes, that's the case. Absolutely, that's the case. And the risk of taking on somebody who's maybe in their first ever job versus somebody who is 3 years into their job, when the pay differential would become zero, people de-risk. Yes, that's a problem. Is it a good thing that the government are backing routes into employment in the sector? Yes, it is. And the two have to be treated separately. I think one of the things that we need to do as a sector, working with the government, but as always, we write our own check in this sector, is to think about the training route from, as Kate says, that person who maybe needs some work readiness skills around, actually timekeeping really matters. No, those are not the right shoes to wear to the office, etc., and so on.
Yeah, which was the point I made on Vanessa Feltz, and she was astonished that we had to train people.
But it's true, and I'll come on to an anecdote about that in a minute. And then, the foundation apprenticeship, which we've been working so hard to achieve over not just this year, but years past as well, which was announced for the hospitality sector over the last few days. That's really good news. We launch our degree level apprenticeship in January. We think we'll do 36 people next year. We want to get up to 1,000 quite quickly. And then, of course, our skills pass, which Kate quite rightly mentions, for that route into work. Providing that route is really important. But just an anecdote very, very quickly.
Yeah, and then I will...
Anything you have. So I worked on setting up an apprenticeship at a former employer in the financial services sector. And one of the things we realised is that there were some behaviours, or if you want to make that open access and social access and break intergenerational unemployment cycles and that sort of thing, we realised that there was a tendency, if you put a 17-year-old from a difficult background in front of a till on their first Friday, or in front of that till, they'll take £5 out of that till. They won't do it in week 2 because they'll have learned that that's not the social behaviour, right? Recognising that actually, if we want to provide routes into careers to people who've had much more difficult starts in life than perhaps the three of us or many of your listeners had, we need to be willing to help people make the journey into work readiness. And for some people that might be timekeeping. For some people it might be being willing to speak, to open up. For some people, it might be bigger issues, but there is no sector, I would argue, which is as well to provide those routes into really good careers and lives than us. Sorry, you were going to say something.
No, I was just going to add to something you were saying. I mean, these are two schemes that we've been working on for a long time, and you started the conversation quite rightly by saying, do they? Is this an anti-hospitality government or is this an anti-business government? And what, people in the sector feel very hard done by. These are two announcements that have been a long time in planning, and we've had to work really hard to get them. They are not a straightforward solution, nor are they a silver bullet, but it is a recognition by the government of the importance of hospitality to their agenda, to getting people off welfare into work. And it's the first time we've got it that somebody outside the industrial strategy has got access to these funds. So it's two big ticks. The third bit is this is about professionalising the sector and, churning away from the bit that the government says, well, you're just low pay, low skill, low value. You don't invest in people. You don't look after your workforce and you're just not a very professional sector. Again, this is a key component in changing that perception of, no, we are a good employer. We are a career. We are as good as construction, which is one of the ones that they always go to. So they are quite important announcements. Also, I'm not going to turn away if there's some free money for small businesses in our sector. I'm going to make sure we get as much of that as we possibly can. So, back to some of the points that we always get. People will always sit here and say, but, well, you're missing the point. That it's lip service, it's lipstick on a pig, or it doesn't matter, or you are caving in to the government and saying thank you for something when the big issue is still out there. We know the big issue is still out there. We can do two things. We can still push it through. This is about campaigning, but it's also about delivering meaningful services that give businesses what they want and need. And at the moment, what businesses want and need is the ability and funds to train, invest and recruit and retain people. Let's help them do that. Let's say, great, that's brilliant. Now let's build on it with government. Let's get it to a situation where we can stand on our own 2 feet and don't need a subsidy. Even better. And if at the same time, by putting people through those training programs, we can get a NICS reduction, happy days.
Yeah. So I guess if it's just the timing, then it's great news, just delivered around a crappy time.
It's really bad timing, and this is government comms just messed up, not joined up because of the way they've done it. We can't talk about it in a way that's
it's in a
positive,
cloud,
that works it through. Nobody's really registered it, but the foundational apprenticeships piece is really key. You can you have a lower national minimum wage rate if you're on an apprenticeship. You don't pay employer NICS if you're on an apprenticeship. The thing that stopped us before is that small businesses can't afford an apprenticeship. We've now got it completely free, and there's bolt-on training at the start of it. So that might help some of those things, and it's more flexible.
And I think if anybody's listening to this, jump on it, get involved, talk to the training providers and get involved.
Wait, stop. It's not unremitting good news. Yes, jump on it. Come and talk to us first, because what the government has done, bizarrely, is limit it to a small number of areas.
I see.
So if you're in a city centre, it's going to, because this is through the mayors, we're going to be able to make it work.
Yeah.
But it's not going to be everywhere for everybody. The ambition is to roll that out afterwards. But let's just...
So I still think it's valuable.
Before anybody
find out
thinks,
as much as you can then, if that's the case.
And just on, and we will... And
come to us.
Come to us
as a trade association. We will help.
We should, in the areas where it is, grab it positively.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, you know, because if we can demonstrate that it works in the areas where they've rolled it out, they're more likely to roll it out everywhere else. So let's, you know, if you think, oh, you know, have a look on the website, have a look, you know, have a look on the government website. If you think, oh, this sounds like it's right for us, come and talk to UK Hospitality. We will talk you through the process. But let's, if we don't grab it in the areas where it is, we won't get it everywhere else. Yeah. So you know,
on that note, we're about 41 minutes in, and anybody listening to this that I know is screaming now 3 letters that we're ignoring.
VAT.
Yes, exactly. I just know it. Like, and just looking at both of your feeds on X, like, it's every other message. Yeah. You're looking at the wrong thing. You're looking at the wrong thing. And I've been in the fish and chip industry since 2002, and I've been in the industry since 2002, and it's been going on since then, and it's still going. Yeah. And so
maybe I can say it on the podcast as to what I can't say on X and social. Neither Alan or myself are stupid. Thank you. We haven't forgotten about it. It's not that we don't understand it. I've worked in the industry 30 years and I've worked in politics 30 years. I get it, but you can hold more than one thought in your brain at one time. And there are multiple things that are happening. And also as a trade association and as individuals who are working for the greater good of the industry, firstly, let's just take as the starting point that anybody who puts themselves into a position of trying to do something like we are doing wants a good outcome. It's not that we are deliberately trying to do something bad. But we do have to work across many different areas in government, and VAT is not the only thing. Yeah. And for government, it is for the industry as a solution, and it's in every conversation. I can promise any listener, there is nothing that we talk about, whether, you know, yesterday I was talking about phytosanitary agreements between the UK and the EU. I do this so your listeners don't have to, but it's how are we going to be able to import fruit and veg quickly, cheaply, and we're going to keep food price inflation down. I mentioned VAT as part of those discussions. I mentioned VAT. It's in every conversation we have. Is the quickest and easiest way to support these businesses, if you needed to, is to cut the VAT rate. I would push back ever so gently on listeners and readers and anybody else, having gone through the budget process that we've just gone through and the big picture narrative that the government has gone through, there is a very real affordability question.
Yeah.
There isn't a great deal of money.
So a friend of mine, sorry to jump in there, a friend of mine, he's not in hospitality at all. He's got a different business, and he's quite an intelligent cookie, and he says to me, I don't get why VAT is treated as a growth lever. He said it is a consumer tax, and I want you guys to tell me that I'm wrong.
Okay.
And he says ultimately, if VAT is dropped and then none of it's passed on to the consumer, it's essentially.
So can I make two?
Yeah.
So
do you want me to finish the sentence before I say it, and then you can tell me I'm wrong? Because it's fine. It's not my point; it's his. He's saying that essentially a VAT cut would essentially be a wealth transfer to people that are in business because they'd keep it. So tell me why he's wrong.
So I think there's two things. The first one is that from an economist's perspective, when you charge VAT, let's imagine it's 20p.
Yeah.
The starting position before you know how much demand there is for an asset or less demand is that half of that goes to the business, half of it goes to the consumer, right? Because the business, if they could charge the extra, they would. Mm-hmm. And if the consumer could pay less, they would. So it sort of goes half and half. So, and of course, that depends on really, really high demand products. The seller thinks, well, I can have all of that. And where actually it's quite tough to get people out to buy that product, the seller will pass more of it on to the consumer, right? The other thing is that VAT relative to the margin of our sector is a very high amount. So if you're selling something, imagine you're like this T-shirt or this jumper I'm wearing, one of my very many navy crew necks, the margin on this is probably 60%. Mm-hmm. 20% on a 60% margin actually isn't that pronounced. But if your margin is far lower, as it often is for a pub or a chippy or a hotel, it's a much higher percentage on the profit. And you see in places where who have much more use of differential VAT rates. So, VAT on accommodation or food in France, in Italy, in Spain is all 10%. It's 7% in Germany. What you see is that both improves the profitability of the business. It does also drive demand, particularly when, as we are at the moment, you're in a market where the consumer's ability to pay extra is very, very limited.
Yeah, I just very briefly to add on to that. What the difference we've got in hospitality is around our inputs and our outputs. So that's what most businesses that you talk to in hospitality say. I'm buying food in at zero and I'm having to charge VAT, and I've got an unfair system and an unfair competition with supermarket ready meals that are in a different position. And so the consumer has a choice, and it's the ability of our businesses to recover VAT that means the sales tax is a tax on the business.
Yeah.
It's more problematic, and the business is effectively a tax collector. I think when you look at when cuts have been done, so Gordon Brown cut VAT by 2 percentage points post the financial crash in order to stimulate demand. But he did say, I'm not expecting you to pass this on to customers. This is to sustain businesses that are really struggling. Ditto Rishi Sunak, when he did it, said there was an expectation that would support the businesses through tough times, but would be used to stimulate demand. So he went for a bigger tax cut. In COVID, when we had that tax cut, 75% of it was passed through in the form of price cuts to consumers. In part or all, it was passed through in price cuts. Some of that might have been done by keeping prices the same and not increasing it when costs went through. You will inevitably see that. If they were to cut VAT now, businesses would inevitably keep some of that because they would try and rebuild some of their shattered margins that would give them viability, because input cost price inflation's been running about 13 to 20% for a couple of years, and we have not been able to pass that through in price. So businesses are doing sort of 5% price increases and running to stand still. Therefore, a VAT cut now, you'd probably see less pass through, but over time it would be, and prices would start to come down relative to
how
broader
much they
inflation.
could have gone up from. So what's the hardest thing when you're trying to explain this government? If we're just talking about VAT only, what you've just said to me, you tell it to them, MPs, civil servants and such. What is it they don't get? Is it just the fact that the state of the country at the moment, or is it the fact that it's too chunky to tackle?
It's the cost. It's not an intellectual economic argument. It's political choices. And that's what they play back to us. And that's what, so, I am bound to get a whole load of people coming on as a result of this, telling me I'm wrong, or I just don't get it, or I'm not fully committed to that. But let's leave that to one side. Just doing your bit of playing devil's advocate and playing it back. The cost of the VAT cut that we're asking for is somewhere between £4 and £5 billion. As a minister, you've got a choice. That's probably a penny off income tax, or it's lifting the thresholds that you're talking about to get more people paying less tax. Or it's a huge investment into schools and public health. And you've got a government that is committed to public services and doing the investment. Labour is more instinctively likely to look at VAT because it's a regressive tax. It hits the poorest hardest. But, that's the kind of choices. And I've had played back. You're talking to me about a VAT cut, but you're also asking me for changes on NICs. Which is it you actually want? And then that's a very moral question. Is it better for the young people who are coming through the industry to be able to get jobs and opportunities, and for us to be able to invest? Those are the kind of choices. So in no way, shape or form can you ever get the politician away from, it's going to cost me £4 to £5 billion and I could do a lot with that. And they also come back with, whatever you think about business rates, that is the single biggest benefit that we've given to business. May not be all hospitality, it might be all businesses, but that's a huge amount of money that's been given. And, the VAT is a big set of deficit on the ledger.
Yeah. And I think your answer to, getting all these little things, I think most people would rather trade all the little things for lower VAT. I think based on your X feeds, by the way. Not that I've not done the science, but yeah.
But again, do people really think I am that naive and that gullible and that stupid that I am being bought off by government? And if the trade-off was on the table of, Kate, you could have XYZ or you could have VAT, that I wouldn't snap the hands off on VAT. Yeah. It's...
Yeah.
To some degree.
It's tough. And the other one that you always get on X and Twitter feeds is Germany's done it and Ireland's done it.
Yeah.
But they have always had, back to Alan's point, we've only ever had 20% or zero. And it's difficult to see that. Germany and Ireland have always had these differential rates and multiple rates, and they're coming down 3 to 5 percentage points rather than us looking at something big and existential.
I keep saying it to people. I've mentioned it many times on the podcast. I've been to Cyprus a lot. I know friends that have been to Spain. I was in Cyprus twice this year. You look at the receipt after going to the supermarket. Most things at the supermarket is 8 to 12%. And that's, deodorant, chicken, you name it, everything. We don't have that in England.
No, we don't. And that, again, is the politician's trade-off.
Yes, exactly. And imagine...
That is the politician's trade-off.
And a friend of mine says to me all the time, like, imagine hospitality gets that 10% VAT cut, or whichever, 10% VAT cut or 10% VAT rate. But the flip side is that we have to put 8 to 10% on everything at the supermarket. Can you imagine the red tops tomorrow? Yeah. It's not going to be, hey, guess what? It's now 10% better off at Wetherspoons or Nando's. It's going to be, you're paying 10% more at the supermarket. There's the negative story that sells. And
just look at Pastygate.
Absolutely.
Within your memory. Yeah. And institutional memories in the Treasury are hardwired. They all have that. They know what happened at that point. So it is difficult to fiddle with in that way. Equally, it's the same trade-off that people will talk about of, do you lift the VAT threshold or other thresholds and then everybody above that rate has to pay more? Or the other one that's been put to us by ministers is, do you just scrap the VAT threshold altogether and that's the price for
anybody that wants
a lower rate of VAT? You just have the flat rate scheme all the way through.
Oh, so in that sense, if you have a pub, a restaurant or a chippy, you're in straight away. There's none of this threshold at all. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, can you imagine some of your...
Again, I can just see it's only the negative side of the story that's going to blow up on the media. It's none of it's going to be, hey, guess what? Here's the good news. It's going to be, let's just focus on the bad news until you're sick of it. We've seen that with every story. But yeah, I just think that, I'd probably like to see is, it would be nice if there was lower VAT on restaurants and pubs, and I tell you why, just purely from a public health aspect, getting people out and being social. There is, and I could see how there's some logic there, and if it means you have to put some tax on beer in the supermarket or a bit more, then that's probably not a bad thing, because that probably levels the playing field somewhat. I'm not an economist, I'm just doing this on the fly, but I can see how encouraging people, especially post-COVID, to be social, where's the negative there?
Yeah, incentivizing people to consume in responsible, licensed premises, if it's talking about alcohol consumption, but socializing with people. You have your portion size is controlled, your nutritional is controlled, all the information is controlled. Somebody is there to sort of do a stop. You've had enough if it's drinking. Incentivizing consumption on premises. Absolutely positive. It's the right thing. Controversial when it was done in that way during COVID, because you'll remember very well do you get the VAT cut if it's takeaway or eat in? And the government wanted to incentivize eating in. We do have a different rate of duty on beer if it's sold in a pub versus sold in a supermarket or anywhere else. And it's all sold in bottles. That kind of thing can be used by the government, and they did it this time round as well. When you look at gambling duties, They put the taxes up for online, and they kept it the same if it was in-person gambling, landside, and all of those kind of things. So you can see a direction of travel, and that's something that we also talk to the government about. Incentivizing consumption where you want it is what you should be using the tax regime to do.
Absolutely. And last two bits to finish up on, your data has been used everywhere, which is amazing. You're doing the hard work, you're trying to inform the media and informing members. What does the hospitality industry look like if government carry on doing what they want and maybe not listening as much as they could? And what can listeners do? What can your members do as well?
Well, so thank you for the compliment on the data. Our team worked very hard on that, and we do take the decision to make that available as widely as possible, because we think that this is this is important for people to have at their fingertips. And we know that if Kate goes on, BBC News or Radio 4 and shares a data point, then very quickly that escapes quarantine and is everywhere on Twitter, and it doesn't get attributed to us, and that's okay, because the data is the point. What does the future look like? Well, look, last year's budget, it depends which ONS data set, because they kept changing their mind. But let's say it's between 60 and 100,000 job losses between budgets, let's say. There's a tendency to say, well, it'll be the same next year. I don't think at the moment we can predict exactly what the impact of business rates will be to that level of precision, and I would counsel anyone from against doing that. But I think we do know that it's harder than it was pre-budget, and it is harder after last year's budget than before. What I do think we should expect is that if last year's budget really affected businesses which were already perhaps on the verge of being marginal, with that plus this year's budget, we'll see businesses who thought that they were much more stable suddenly get into challenge. And it's a bit like a pyramid. First you lose the top, but then it can get bigger. I would counsel anyone against putting a number on that for now. But I would certainly say that it's going to be a tough year, which is why we have to continue to fight. On the positive, if I can, it's not just a cliche to say this is a very resilient sector. One of the things which is interesting about this sector is that it has traditionally changed very quickly in response to what the consumer wants. And I think the bit of this challenge which is external to government and is about changing consumer behaviour, I'm really confident that the sector is innovative enough to find, my daughter's a vegetarian. When we go to the chippy, she now gets a really good vegetarian meal from the chippy. So that sort of innovation will always be there, but I think fair to say that the government-led challenge is worse rather than better than it was a month ago.
I'm northern working class. We've always had egg and chips.
You've always had egg and chips.
But anyway, leaving that aside, I think the only thing I would add is, on the data. And this ties back to what can listeners do, what can businesses do, what can members do. On the data, we are a membership organisation. We're not for profit. We are funded by our members to deliver for our members. And everything that we do, whether that's campaign advice, support or guidance, or, how to navigate through your business rates bill, which is what we're doing at the moment, hand-holding people through it all comes at a cost. And the data that is put out there that people use comes at a cost as well. So, be part of the organisation, join the organisation. It will give a whole load of support and members, but it adds immensely to when I'm going out and lobbying or presenting in the media to be able to say, how many members we've got and what proportion of the market. And at the moment, we've got 95% of the eating and drinking out market and accommodation, but in membership. So that really helps. And being able to talk from small to large, again, really helps. If you're a member and you give us your data when we do the surveys, and again, some of them are open, so they're open to all of the businesses. Give us your data, give us your information. You'll then get that data back. So you can help to do benchmarking of your own sites, do evaluation methodology, look at all of that. And then the final point is, we need to be talking to the government. It's not just about losses. We have to be talking about missed opportunities, because governments don't save dying industries. So we need to have a very fine balance there when we're talking to them. Yes, you've done something, and these are the consequences. But there's also about, how many people who would have normally gone street food stall in a market to taking their first takeaway and chippy to going into sit down restaurant to going from 1 to 5 to 5 to 15 to 50 to 300? Where are they coming from? What's happening there? How are we going to get those businesses through? Because at the moment, we've just made it immeasurably harder to go from a mental health perspective, if nothing else, to go from I've made cakes at home and I'm serving them on a market stall to I've got a restaurant and I'm a business and I'm contributing and I'm employing people.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to finish with a couple of our listeners are members of UK Hospitality, and one of them is a good friend of mine, and he said that at every level of everything significant that's been happening, he's felt massively informed. He loves all the emails, he loves the correspondence he gets. He feels like he's part of something, and he feels like he's crucially informed. And I think that's really good. But yeah, just well done on everything that you do. I know it's hard. And I know some people maybe listen to this and think, oh, well, there's nothing significant. I think there is. And I think that given what it could be, you should take the wins, and then you can focus on the next challenge. And I think, but if like you say, I was struck by that when you said government doesn't help dying industry. You've got to be careful how you portray yourselves. Yeah.
Yeah.
A real good point.
And also, in the immortal words of Ariana Grande, thank you, next.
Yeah.
And that's what loads of other sectors do when they're working with government. The manufacturers, the government complains to us that they give money to other people and they don't say thank you, and they're just on to the next thing. That's the kind of thing we need to be taking. Yeah, great, this is lovely. Training, employment, all of those kind of things. And to finally your point, that kind message from the member, when it is really difficult, when times are really challenging, that's when your trade association is just your peers. Yeah. You can come together, hear what other people are doing, find solutions, or just network together and realise that we are all in this together and we'll get out of it together as well.
Absolutely. On that note, I appreciate you both. I appreciate your time. I'm very grateful. Have a great Christmas.
Happy Christmas.
That's it for today. Huge thanks to Kate and Allen from UK Hospitality. It's been absolutely brilliant having them both on together. If you want tighter control of the numbers on your business, jump over to ceres.shop and have a look at our calculators. And if you want lots of help with your margins, costs, loyalty and energy, then the Ceres blog is there for you. Thank you for listening to this episode with Kate and Allen. Keep your pants hot, your margins sharp, and I'll see you on the next episode of the Ceres Podcast.